She threw her belongings on the front lawn and told her she would die poor, alone, and forgotten. She poisoned her husband's mind for 5 years, slow and deliberate, the way you poison a well, so that by the time anyone notices, the damage is already permanent. She weaponized a miscarriage. She broke into her office. She froze her bank accounts, hired men to manufacture lies, forged documents to simulate betrayal, and systematically dismantled every wall of a marriage she had decided. From the very first handshake, she did not want to exist. And then, as though the universe itself had a sense of humor darker than anything a writer could invent, she used stolen family money to launch a hostile takeover of a $900 billion technology empire. The same empire that belonged, entirely and without contest, to the woman she had just humiliated on a sun-scorched front lawn in the middle of July. The mistress she had personally selected as a replacement had spent 8 years climbing the ranks inside that same company, working for the woman she helped destroy, never once knowing who sat on the throne above her. So before this story moves one word further, hold these questions in your chest. What does a woman do when the person trying to bury her has accidentally handed her the shovel? What happens to a mother-in-law who declared war on the one person powerful enough to end her entire world with a single signature? And how long, does a woman have to be underestimated before the world finally understands that silence is not weakness and patience is not defeat? Stay here. Because karma in this story does not arrive gently. It arrives in a boardroom, in handcuffs, in a headline that runs on every financial channel before the sun goes down, and it is absolutely devastating. Elena Hargrove was 36 years old, and everything about the way she moved through the world was intentional. Her Westbrook townhouse sat on a tree-lined street where the houses were old and the money was quiet. Inside, the kitchen still carried the faint scratch on the counter from the Saturday she and Daniel tried to move the refrigerator themselves, both of them laughing so hard they gave up and ordered pizza at noon. The hallway still smelled of lavender from the window box she planted the spring they married. Small things. The kind that accumulate into a life without you noticing, until someone starts removing them one by one. What nobody in that life knew, not Daniel, not the neighbors who waved at her over hedges, not the Hargrove family with their oil portraits and their century-old sense of superiority, was that Elena had built Novosphere Technologies from a $4,000 laptop in a studio apartment when she was 24 years old. No investor, no inheritance, no safety net of any kind. Just a mind that moved faster than the industry around it, and a stubbornness that her mother used to call a gift and her father used to call dangerous, and that turned out to be both. Novosphere now ran beneath the surface of the modern world the way electricity ran beneath walls, invisible, essential, everywhere. Cloud infrastructure for 40% of the world's hospitals. AI architecture used by 19 governments. Financial routing systems that processed $11 trillion in transactions annually. Current valuation, $900 billion. Elena held controlling interest through a structure of holding companies, trusts, and a board of trustees, so legally airtight that 3 separate teams of forensic accountants had failed over the years to trace ownership back to a human face. That face was hers, and she had hidden it deliberately after a wound that taught her the price of being seen too clearly. She had been 26, Novosphere 18 months old and worth $50 million and climbing like something on fire, when a competitor who lacked the patience to build his own empire decided it was simpler to take hers. He sent someone, a woman, warm and plausible, who appeared in Elena's orbit as a potential friend and spent 4 months getting close enough to extract proprietary source code. The attempt failed. Elena's security instincts had always run ahead of her trust, but it left something behind. Not fear, something colder than fear, clarity. She understood from that moment forward that visibility was a liability she could not afford. The moment they see your face, they know where to aim. So she removed her face entirely. She became E. Gray, initials only, no photograph, no recorded voice, no public footprint, and she never looked back. She met Daniel Hargrove the following year at an industry charity event. He was tall and easy in the way certain men are easy, like a room with good light. He listened, genuinely listened, the kind that makes a person feel located in the world. She loved him quickly and was not ashamed of it. She told him she ran a successful technology company. He never pressed for the size of it. She never offered the number, because she had watched enough relationships bend under the weight of wealth to know that money, when introduced too early, becomes the gravity everything else orbits. She wanted him to stay because of her, not because of 900 billion reasons. They married on a Saturday in September. She wore her mother's pearl earrings, small, real, irreplaceable. The reception was warm and full of laughter. In almost every photograph from that night, Daniel is looking at her. His mother, Margaret Hargrove, is looking at something else entirely. Margaret was 61, the widow of Harold Hargrove, who had left her a $200 million estate, a name that still opened certain doors, and a son she had spent 30 years sculpting in the image of her own needs. She was the kind of woman who wore wealth the way other people wore skin, as though removing it would leave nothing underneath. She had a vision for Daniel's wife that predated Elena by decades. The right bloodline, the right family name, the right understanding, unspoken but absolute, that her son's household would remain an extension of her own authority. Elena was none of these things, and Margaret knew it the moment they shook hands. The first meeting was at Daniel's firm's annual gala. Elena wore navy. Margaret wore pearls and an expression of careful assessment. She looked at Elena the way a jeweler looks at a stone they already know is artificial, thorough, conclusive, already decided. Then she turned to her son and said, with a smile that could be mistaken for warmth from a distance, "She's pretty, Daniel," in that accessible sort of way. Elena heard it. 3 people nearby heard it. She smiled, shook the woman's hand, and said nothing. Margaret catalogued that silence as submission. She had no framework yet for what it actually was. At home that night, Elena opened the leather journal she kept in the locked drawer of her desk. The one she had begun keeping the year Novosphere crossed its first billion, after a board advisor told her, "Document everything. Power without receipts is just a story." She wrote the date. She wrote what Margaret had said, word for word. She wrote the names of the 3 people who had heard it. Then she closed the journal, set it in the drawer, and went to bed beside Daniel, who was already asleep and who had not noticed the comment at all. The journal would grow very thick over the next 5 years. She had not yet understood how thick it would need to become. Margaret Hargrove did not launch her campaign loudly. She was far too intelligent for that. She launched it the way termite colonies launch, invisibly, from the inside, eating the structure of a thing long before the damage becomes visible to anyone standing outside it. The first year of the marriage, she began referring to Elena's work as her little hobby. She said it with a laugh, the kind calibrated precisely to make the target feel foolish for taking offense. Elena and her hobby, she would say at family dinners, gesturing vaguely toward wherever Elena sat. Always on that laptop, very dedicated, laughter, movement on. By the time Elena processed the diminishment, the conversation had already traveled somewhere else. That was the design of it. The second year, Margaret began working on Daniel directly. She would call him on evenings she knew Elena was deep in a proxy board meeting, those calls that could run 3 or 4 hours, where Elena sat at her desk with her headphones on and the door closed and the rest of the household effectively ceased to exist for her. Margaret's voice on those evenings was softer than usual, concerned. "She's always working, darling. Is she happy at home?" Because a woman who spends that much time locked away from her own husband, and then the trail-off, deliberate, leaving the sentence unfinished so that Daniel's imagination, not Margaret's words, would complete it. A woman who did that to a sentence knew exactly what she was doing. By the 3rd year, Margaret had introduced a new instrument into the orchestra of her manipulation, Victoria Cross. Victoria was 34 and moved through rooms with the particular confidence of someone who had never been told no in any context that mattered. She had a sharp face, sharper instincts, and a talent for reading the architecture of power in any space she entered. She was Senior Vice President of Global Partnerships at Novosphere Technologies, a position she had earned through genuine brilliance and maintained through ruthless precision. She drove a silver Porsche, kept an apartment in Tribeca, and wore the kind of clothes that did not require labels because anyone who needed to know already knew. Her net worth, personal, 60 million. Her ambition, categorically larger. What Victoria did not know, what she had never thought to wonder about, because the anonymous E. Gray was simply the faceless authority she reported to through 3 layers of management, was that the woman who owned Novosphere, the woman who had built the empire Victoria was climbing inside, was the same woman whose marriage she was now being steered toward dismantling. Margaret had met her at a charity benefit and seen immediately what she wanted to see: money, elegance, and a complete absence of the inconvenient quality Elena possessed, which was the inability to be managed. She engineered 6 meetings between Victoria and Daniel over 2 months, a dinner, a fundraiser, a gallery opening, each one presented as coincidence. None of them were. She texted Daniel after the 3rd. "Victoria asked after you again. She has such substance, darling, such standing, not like..." And then nothing, just the dash. The suggestion hanging there in blue light on Daniel's screen, asking him to fill in the blank himself. He began responding to Victoria's messages, faster than he should have. The miscarriage happened in the 3rd year of the marriage, 14 weeks, a quiet devastation that Elena and Daniel survived together in the specific way that couples survive enormous grief, by holding onto each other in the dark and making promises. He held her for 4 hours. He said, "Only us, love. No one else will ever know." She believed him, because she had no reason yet to understand that Daniel Hargrove, for all his warmth and all his easy charm, was a man who had never successfully kept anything from his mother. 3 weeks after the miscarriage, at a family brunch Elena attended against her better judgment, she heard Margaret's voice carrying across the room. "Apparently Elena can't carry a child. The doctor said her body simply isn't built for it. Tragic, really. Daniel deserves a family." Elena set down her fork. She picked it back up. She finished her meal without her hand shaking once. The performance of composure cost her something she could not name or measure. She drove home alone afterward and sat in the parked car in the driveway for 11 minutes. She did not go inside until she could trust her face completely. Then she opened her journal and wrote everything down. The 4th year brought the private investigator, a man named Gerald Finch, hired by Margaret, who spent 6 weeks attempting to find something usable in Elena's life, and found almost nothing. Because Elena Hargrove moved through the world with the careful, habitual precision of someone who had been protecting something important for a very long time. What Finch did find was the name of a holding company, Gray Horizon LLC. He reported it to Margaret as a minor financial asset, perhaps 2 or 3 million, an investment account. Margaret's lawyer noted it for the divorce proceedings she had already begun planning in private. Neither of them had any idea what Gray Horizon LLC connected to when you followed the paperwork far enough. Finch also manufactured something he couldn't find honestly. Margaret had paid for ammunition, not just information, and so he provided it. A folder of photographs taken at a bar, a fabricated cover letter, and a narrative suggesting that Daniel had been seduced by a woman Elena had hired to create grounds for a more favorable divorce settlement. The logic required the reader to suspend considerable disbelief. Daniel, already softened by years of Margaret's quiet erosion, read it with fear instead of reason. He confronted Elena. The fight was not loud. It was worse than loud, it was quiet. And Daniel's voice had the register of a man who has already half decided, who is going through the motions of asking because decency requires it, but whose mind has already begun its departure. "I believe you," he said, after Elena walked him through the fabrication point by point. But his eyes did not say that. His eyes said something had already broken that believing her could not repair. It was November when Margaret broke into the office. She let herself in with the spare key Daniel had given her, the one Elena didn't know he'd given away, and moved through the townhouse with the deliberateness of a woman looking for something she hadn't yet identified. She reached the office door, found the backup key in the hall drawer where Daniel had told her it lived, and opened it. 3 monitors, a server terminal, folders, and on the left shelf, 4 external hard drives stacked neatly in a row. She took all 4. She didn't know what was on them. It didn't matter. The point was removal. The point was to strip Elena of something, anything, the way you strip bark from a tree, not because bark has value, but because the tree needs it. What Margaret had taken were decoys. Elena had installed the tripwire system 3 years earlier, after a hacker used her home IP address to attempt a breach of Novosphere's HR infrastructure. The real system lived behind 17 layers of encryption on a private server, whose physical location was registered in her CFO Raymond Cole's name. The drives on that shelf were constructed specifically for this scenario, encrypted bricks of scrambled data, placed within reach, designed to be found and taken. The moment they left the building, Elena's security system sent her a silent notification. She was in the middle of a proxy board call when her phone buzzed. She read the alert. She knew immediately. She typed one message to Raymond Cole with her left hand while continuing to speak with her right voice, without a single interruption in cadence. Log it. That evening, Daniel came home and found flowers on the kitchen table Margaret had left them, and a text from his mother saying she'd stopped by. Elena showed him the security alert. He said he would speak to her. He never did. That night, Elena changed every lock in the house and watched a car she didn't recognize sit across the street for 7 hours without moving. She wrote the license plate in her journal. The divorce papers were served on a Wednesday morning in March. A process server rang the bell at 7:14 a.m. Elena, still in her robe, signed for the envelope, thanked the man, read every page standing in the hallway, then set the papers on the table and made coffee. 3 weeks later, Margaret threw an engagement party for Daniel and Victoria in the Westbrook townhouse, the house Elena had helped select and helped furnish and helped pay for. Margaret sent Elena an invitation, not by oversight, by design, a power move wrapped in the stationery of social grace. Elena did not attend, but a mutual friend sent a video of Margaret's toast, and Elena watched it twice on her phone, sitting alone on the floor of her apartment. To Daniel, who finally had the wisdom to choose a woman worthy of this family, a woman with real substance, real standing, not a girl who plays at business on a computer all day while pretending to be something she was never born to be. The room in the video laughed. Daniel looked at the table. He lifted his glass with everyone else. Elena watched it twice. She put the phone face down on the floor. She leaned her head back against the wall. She closed her eyes. This was the longest she had let herself be still in the dark since all of it began. Then she opened her eyes, picked up the phone, and called Raymond Cole. "Ray," she said, "begin phase 1. And the last morning, she drove to the townhouse to collect what remained of hers, her father's watch in its velvet case, her mother's letters, a hard drive containing the original code she had written at 22 that had become Novosphere's first architecture. She found her boxes already outside on the front lawn, stacked in the July heat, the velvet case sitting on top of a cardboard box like something discarded. Margaret stood in the doorway in sunglasses, watching. "Women like you are disposable, Elena," Margaret said, loud and unhurried, the way people speak when they want an audience and know they have one. "You were never good enough for my son. You never will be. You will die poor, and you will die alone, and you will die forgotten. And the worst part, you know I'm right." Elena looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up the velvet case. She loaded her boxes into the car, one at a time, slowly, without rushing, without trembling. She got in. She pulled out of the driveway. She did not look in the rear-view mirror. Margaret stood in the doorway and watched her go with the satisfaction of a woman who believes she has just finished something. She had not finished anything. She had just handed Elena the last piece she needed. Elena's phone rang before she reached the end of the street. Raymond Cole never called without texting first. That was the protocol: text, then call, always. The fact that the call came with no preceding text meant only one thing: something had happened too fast for the formality of sequence. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me." His voice was the way it got when something was enormous, and he was containing it through sheer professional discipline. "Pull over." She pulled over. "Raymond." Victoria Cross filed acquisition paperwork at 9 this morning. Hostile takeover bid on Novosphere. The financing source, the seed capital she used to trigger the bid, is a wire transfer of $47 million from the Hargrove Family Trust. Margaret Hargrove moved estate money this morning. "Elena," he paused. "They are trying to buy your company. They don't know it's yours. They are trying to buy you." 3 seconds of silence inside the car. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of the precise, crystalline moment when something that was already decided becomes actionable. "Let them think it's working," Elena said. She hung up. She sat with both hands on the steering wheel and looked through the windshield at an ordinary street on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. And she allowed herself one thing: not anger, not grief, not even satisfaction. Just the cold, clarifying awareness that Margaret Hargrove had just committed securities fraud with stolen family money in an attempt to purchase a company from its anonymous owner, who was sitting in a parked car 3 miles away with every receipt she had ever needed already in a leather journal at home. The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday at 10 in the morning on the 47th floor of Novosphere's New York headquarters. Raymond sent the notice through official channels. The agenda listed only Capital Defense Review, attendance mandatory for all senior leadership. Victoria Cross arrived first. She always arrived first to rooms she intended to take. She had her legal team with her, a leather portfolio on the table, and a prepared press release in her bag announcing herself as incoming executive chair. She wore white. She was smiling. She had the particular confidence of a person who believes they have already won. The board filed in, 12 people, serious faces, good suits. Then the general counsel entered and said simply, "E. Gray will be attending in person today." The room went still in a way that rooms go still when something genuinely unprecedented occurs. Not just quiet, but recalibrated, like every person present had just slightly adjusted the frame through which they understood what they were part of. In 14 years, E. Gray had never been in the same physical room as any of them. The board had communicated with the owner only through Raymond Cole. Victoria's lead attorney leaned over and murmured something in her ear. She straightened. She assumed what she was about to see was a hired proxy, a face for the phantom, a representative dressed up as authority. The door opened. Elena Hargrove walked in. Victoria did not recognize her immediately. Why would she? To Victoria, Elena was a footnote, Daniel's discarded wife, the woman his mother had dismantled, a casualty in a story Victoria had benefited from without being required to feel anything about it. Elena was wearing a charcoal blazer, her mother's pearl earrings, and an expression of absolute stillness. The kind that does not come from suppressing emotion, but from being so far beyond it that emotion is no longer the relevant instrument. Raymond Cole stood at the head of the table and said, "Board members, I want to formally introduce Elena Gray Hargrove, founder, sole owner, and controlling interest of Novosphere Technologies." The sound Victoria made was not quite a word. It was the sound of a person whose entire architecture of certainty has just been removed from beneath them. Elena sat. She opened her folder. She did not look at Victoria for a long moment. She reviewed a document. She made a note in the margin. Then she looked up, and when her eyes found Victoria's, they carried the quiet of someone addressing a problem that is already solved. "Ms. Cross," she said, "I've reviewed your acquisition bid in full. I've also reviewed the source of your financing in considerable detail. Before we address the bid itself, I'd like to discuss how $47 million from a private family trust was used to fund a takeover attempt on a publicly adjacent entity by a senior employee of that same entity, using internal knowledge of our capital structure that she accessed exclusively in her role here." Victoria's attorney rose to speak. Elena raised one hand, not dramatically, just precisely enough, and he stopped. "You'll want to let me finish, because what I am describing is securities fraud, insider trading, wire fraud involving the unauthorized transfer of funds from a family trust, and I will be referring every element of it to the SEC this afternoon." She paused. "The paperwork is already prepared. I had it ready on Wednesday." The color left Victoria's face in stages, like light leaving a room when the sun moves. Federal agents were waiting in the lobby. Victoria Cross was arrested at 1:47 p.m., escorted through the revolving glass doors of the building she had spent 8 years conquering, in the white she had worn to claim it, with her attorney on the phone behind her and the entire ground floor watching. By 3 o'clock, it was on every financial news channel. Her Novosphere stock options, $180 million in vested equity, were frozen pending investigation. Her golden parachute voided, 8 years of climbing dismantled in an afternoon. Elena sat alone in the boardroom after everyone had left. Raymond brought her coffee. He sat across from her without speaking for a while, which was one of the many reasons she trusted him absolutely. "The wire transfer from the Hargrove Trust," he said finally. "That triggers federal exposure for Margaret." "I know," Elena said. "Her personal accounts will be frozen within 48 hours. The estate will be listed as collateral." "I know." He looked at her. "How long have you been ready for this?" She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Outside the 47th floor windows, Manhattan moved below them, enormous and indifferent. "Since the first dinner," she said. "I just needed them to move first." That evening across the city, Margaret Hargrove's phone began ringing and did not stop. Her banker, her attorney, her accountant, each call shorter and more alarming than the last. She sat in the drawing room of the Hargrove estate surrounded by oil portraits of people who had built what she was now losing, and for the first time in 61 years, she did not know what to do with her hands. She called Daniel. He didn't answer. She called again. The third time it went to voicemail before the first ring finished. He had declined it manually. She set the phone on the side table. A knock at the front door. A man in a dark suit. A manila envelope slid beneath the door. Inside, a civil lien notice. The estate listed as collateral in a federal fraud investigation. Margaret read it 3 times, sitting on the floor of her own hallway, and the portraits of the Hargroves looked down at her from the walls, and they offered her nothing at all. Daniel came on a Sunday. Elena heard the buzzer and looked at the intercom camera and saw him standing in the vestibule of her apartment building, smaller than she remembered, though nothing about him had physically changed. People look smaller, she had come to understand, when the story they have been telling themselves about who they are stops being credible. She let him up. She opened the door and stood in it. He started speaking almost immediately, the way guilty people speak, filling silence before it can become accusation. He said he didn't know the full extent of what his mother had done. He said Victoria had deceived him. He said he was sorry, several times, in the way men say it when they mean, "Please make this smaller than it is, because I cannot carry the actual size of it." Elena listened to all of it. She let him finish. Then she turned to the side table by the door, picked up a folder she had placed there that morning as though she had known he was coming. Because she had known, the same way she always knew the next move, and held it out to him. He took it. Inside, the divorce decree, fully executed and signed, with a note from her lawyer attached. Ms. Gray Hargrove does not contest any asset claims. She wishes Mr. Hargrove peace and sincerely means it. "I'm not fighting you, Daniel," she said. "I never was." He looked up, his eyes were red at the edges. "Elena, You chose her interpretation of me over your own lived knowledge of me," she said. "For 5 years, every time she whispered something into the space between us, you let it land. Not because you're cruel, but because you never once made the decision to choose me over her discomfort. And I can forgive that. I have, actually." She paused. "But I can't unknow it." She closed the door. Not hard. Not with any performance of finality. Just a door, closing the way doors do when what was behind them is simply no longer required. The Hargrove estate sold 14 days later. Margaret, hemorrhaging money into legal fees as the federal case expanded and her frozen accounts remained inaccessible, could not sustain the property costs. The listing went up on a Friday. A cash offer arrived on Saturday, full asking price. No contingencies, no negotiations. The kind of offer that closes in 11 days because the buyer has decided and money is not the obstacle. The buyer was Gray Horizon LLC. Elena bought the house that Margaret had used as a monument to herself and a weapon against everyone else. She did not move into it. She donated it to the Elena Gray Foundation within 30 days of closing. The Westbrook estate became the Westbrook Women's Transitional Center, a resource hub and shelter for women rebuilding after financial abuse, coercive control, and systematic manipulation. The renovation announcement ran in 4 newspapers and 2 national magazines. Raymond sent her the clippings. She pinned one to the wall of her office above her primary monitor, without framing it, without ceremony. Novosphere's 10th anniversary gala was held on a Friday evening in November at the Grand Meridian Hotel. 800 guests, every significant figure in global technology, 3 sitting heads of state, camera crews from 40 international outlets because tonight, for the first time in 14 years of Novosphere's existence, E. Gray would be photographed, named publicly, seen. Right here, before she walks through that door. This is where you stop and make your voice heard. Margaret threw her things on a lawn and told her she would die forgotten. She weaponized her grief. She stole from her office, froze her accounts, and used family money to try to buy the woman's own empire out from under her. And now Elena Gray Hargrove is about to walk into a room of 800 people and let the whole world see the face they were never supposed to know. Tell us in the comments, what do you think Elena should do next? And where in the world are you watching this from? We want to know. Drop it below right now. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit subscribe. We are building toward 1,000 subscribers and we cannot do it without you. 1 click. That is all it takes. Subscribe, comment, and share this with someone who needs to see that karma is not a myth. It is a woman in a charcoal blazer walking into a room she already owns. Elena arrived last. She always had preferred to enter a room already full. It was a habit born not from ego but from the same instinct that had governed her entire professional life. Let them settle first. Let them establish where they think the power sits, then walk in and quietly relocate it. She was wearing deep midnight blue. Simple, devastating, no entourage, no stylist at her elbow, just herself moving through a room that went quiet in waves, the silence spreading outward from the door the way silence does when something significant has entered and everyone present knows it before they can explain why. She shook hands. She thanked people who had worked inside her empire for years without knowing her face. She accepted gratitude from partners who had built their own success on Novosphere's infrastructure without ever meeting the person who made it possible. She was warm and exact and entirely present in the way of someone who has spent years being invisible and has finally, deliberately, chosen to be seen. Her speech did not mention Margaret. It did not mention Daniel. It did not mention Victoria. It did not need to. "I built this company in secret," she said, standing at the podium looking out at 800 faces, "not because I was afraid of being known, but because I understood early that the moment the world sees you, they will decide who you are before you have had the chance to show them. I wanted to build first, to finish first, and then be seen." She paused. The room was absolutely quiet. "So to everyone who decided who I was before I was done, thank you. Genuinely, you gave me something to prove. And I have enjoyed every single day of proving it." 800 people stood. The cameras flashed like a field of small suns. In a cramped apartment on the other side of the city, in a chair that didn't suit her, and a room that didn't contain her, Margaret Hargrove watched it on every channel simultaneously, flipping between them with a remote she kept pressing too hard. The reporter's voice said, "The long mysterious E. Gray, now revealed as Elena Gray Hargrove, has announced a $500 million commitment to women's financial empowerment initiatives, beginning with the newly opened Westbrook Women's Transitional Center, housed in the former Hargrove family estate." Margaret's teacup slipped from her fingers. It bounced on the thin carpet and rolled under the radiator. She did not pick it up. She did not move from the chair. She sat in the dark and watched the woman she had called disposable receive a standing ovation from 800 people on every screen in the world. And there was nothing left in her. Not rage, not strategy, not the practiced composure of a woman who had always known what to do next. There was only the particular silence of a person who has lost everything they used to use to define themselves, and who is only now beginning to understand what that means. In a correctional facility, Victoria Cross watched the same broadcast from a common room chair, surrounded by strangers who did not know who she had been. Daniel Hargrove watched it on his phone in a studio apartment, lying on his back on a mattress that was not the one he had chosen, in a life that was not the one he had imagined. He watched the entire speech. When it ended, he set the phone face down on his chest and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. He did not turn the light on. The morning after the gala, Elena arrived at her office at 8. Her assistant had left a single item on her desk before she arrived. A sealed envelope, no return address, no postmark, no identifying mark of any kind. Inside, a handwritten note, 2 sentences, written in a hand she did not recognize. "You made a mistake going public. Now they can find you." Elena read it twice, set it down, picked up her phone and called Raymond Cole. Her voice, when he answered, was the same voice she had used in every boardroom, every proxy call, every moment of crisis in 14 years, level, precise, already thinking 3 moves ahead. "Ray, the security protocol I told you I'd never need." A pause, she could hear him straightening in his chair. "Yes." "Start it." She hung up. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her 47th floor office and looked out over the Manhattan skyline, enormous, indifferent, and now entirely aware of her name. And somewhere in that city, or beyond it, someone who was not Margaret, not Victoria, not Daniel, someone who had been watching from a distance for years, someone with resources and patience, and a grudge she had not yet mapped, had just decided that the most powerful anonymous person in the history of technology was now visible. And visibility, as Elena Hargrove knew better than anyone alive, was a liability. The question was no longer what she had survived. The question was what was coming next, and whether she had built enough, planned enough, been patient enough for whatever this was. She looked at the skyline for a long time. Then she turned back to her desk, opened her leather journal to a fresh page, and wrote the date at the top. Just the date, nothing yet. Waiting always for them to move first. End of Part 1. Part 2 coming soon. She survived the ones who hated her from up close, but the enemy watching from a distance had been waiting for exactly this moment. Now that she was finally visible, she was finally vulnerable, and this one did not make the mistake of underestimating her. This one had studied her.